Good morning. I know Luke's already mentioned this, but it's maybe a little surprising that I'm up here. We've been making our way through the book of Exodus these several weeks, but we are taking a break today. Our pastors had a Simeon Trust workshop, and so not to help them not feel too overloaded, they brought in the third stringer or the fourth stringer, whatever you want to call me. But in all seriousness, I am glad that I can serve the pastors in this way today. We should all be thankful, honestly, that our pastors desire to continually grow in their understanding and wisdom and how to communicate God's word. It is a tremendous privilege, and we should be thankful for it. But for today, I want us to reflect on a core idea that is wrapped up in a big theological word. I know I've talked to some of you, maybe even recently about this. There are certain words that you only hear when you're in a church. They could be covenant, Trinity, sanctification, holiness, glorification we heard this morning. And don't forget all the ologies. You got theology, ecclesiology, eschatology, Christology. And if I'm being honest, in my more cynical moments, I call this Christianese. We all have this Christianese. We don't know what we're really saying. But these words do have a purpose. They do. They really do. And they're important because they capture some of the richness of who God is and God's plan for us, both in his world and for his people. And so I thought I would help us think through one of these words today, these rich words, and the word is righteousness. Now, righteousness or righteous means some behavior that is morally right or correct. For someone to be righteous, their desires and actions are right. It's pretty simple. The big question is, who says what desires are right or actions are right? Well, this is a pretty easy one. Kids, you could even answer this one. It's God. God sets the standard for what is right. And if anybody follows God's standards, that person would be righteous, or that person would have righteousness, okay? And righteousness is a word you can say is connected to this very day. No, kids, I'm not talking about Halloween. We'll discuss that in just a second here. No, it's not Halloween. I'm talking about Reformation Day. October 31st, as the pastors mentioned today, some people commemorate this day in which Martin Luther, a German monk, nailed his 95 Theses on the door in Wittenberg in 1517. And this event is commonly regarded as the beginning of the Reformation. This movement was connected with Luther, but involved a lot of Christians all over Europe. They were calling for the church broadly, the Catholic Church, to reform. You see, as people started reading the Bible, they actually had an opportunity to read the Bible, they saw that the Catholic Church actually promoted errors that the Bible didn't say. One of the biggest one is the sale of indulgences. Now, this will sound really confusing if you've read your Bible because you're like, where are they getting this? But the sale of an indulgence was somebody would purchase it, and it was a promise for if one of their family members passed away, it would reduce the amount of time they would stay in purgatory on the Pope's authority. You don't have to understand any of this, but I guarantee you it's not in the Bible, okay? And that's why we call it the Reformation, though, because you had Christians, you had people like Martin Luther saying, we got to go to the Bible. We have to change how we're thinking about it because this is not what the Bible says. This is not what God has said for us to do. And this is just scratching the surface of the Reformation. There's a lot there. But the biggest parts, the core thing about the Reformation and why we want to prop it up and say it's important to remember is because it did call God's people to go back to the Bible. And more importantly, it asked the question, the Reformation really asked the question, how do we get right with God? How are we saved? Now, those ideas are kind of captured, and the pastors in Sunday evening has kind of been going through this, the 5 solas. I bet you guys are all experts at this right now. The 5 solas: Scripture alone, faith alone, grace alone, Christ alone, to God's glory alone, kind of encapsulates what the Reformation really stood for. And again, if you want to learn more about that, we can listen online to the sermons that have been preached Sunday evening, and actually come to Pastor Ron's sermon in a week from now, to God's glory alone. But I just want to focus on one of these because I think it relates to my word, righteousness, okay? Because faith alone is intimately connected with righteousness. When we say faith alone, it's a way of saying the only way to get right with God, the only way to be righteous before God, is through faith in Jesus. What most of us have probably heard as justification by faith. And that word justification is also closely connected with the word righteous. Justification, I know I'm doing a lot of definitions. Please bear with me. Justification is declaring or showing someone is right, or something is right. For God to justify someone, they must be righteous. They must be right. Because God is righteous, anybody who wants to serve or to be near him must be righteous. Without being right before God, God cannot justify them. Without righteousness, God can not only not justify them, he has to judge them. He has to punish them because he is right. Because God is righteous. This is really important. Because God is righteous, he requires a righteous life. And so the big question all of us have to ask is, how do I become righteous so that God can justify me? Because you do need to be righteous to be near God. It's a fact. Now here we go. There's another event going on today, Halloween. Now I'm not going to weigh in on whether you should or should not partake in Halloween. Halloween is actually a mixture of all bunch of different festivals, but I do want to highlight one festival that's related to Halloween in some ways. It's a Gaelic festival, and it was marking the end of the harvest season, and it's called Samhain. Now, Celts believed that on the night before the new year, the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead became blurred. So in Samhain, people dressed up in costumes as a way to disguise themselves from these powerful spirits. They would also offer food and drink as a way to try to appease these spirits with offerings. So, with a power greater than their own, these people, to get right with the spirits, they would either hide, disguising themselves, or they would try to appease, giving them goodies. I think this is really interesting, actually, because I think a lot of people treat the God of the Bible in the same way, or they try to respond to God in the same way. People either disguise themselves, trying to hide from God, acting like he's really not there, he's really not a big deal, or people also try to appease God by being kind, coming to church now and again, hoping that their effort will be enough. People know in their heart they need to deal with God. So how do you respond to God's righteousness today? How do we respond? Well, to help us think through this question, I would ask all of us to open up our Bible to Romans. We'll be going through Romans chapters 1 through 3, but you can start with Romans 1. And I think this is a great place because this is where Paul, the person who wrote Romans, explains to us how people typically respond to God's righteous demand. There are those who flee from him. There are those who think their effort will honor him. And there are those who have faith or trust in God's Son. And this will be our outline today. 3 typical responses to God's righteous requirement: fleeing, faking, or having faith. Now, to get us really quick oriented to this letter to the Romans, Paul wrote this letter for a whole bunch of reasons. One of them, though, was he wanted to introduce himself to the Roman church, and he was hoping that this would be kind of his home base when he got there, so he could go further west into Europe, into Spain, to proclaim the gospel. But Paul also wanted to write to the Roman church to make sure and to help them understand more fully the gospel. Paul wanted the Roman church to have further confidence in the gospel they believed in, and to have confidence that Paul was telling the true gospel. And as Paul writes this letter, he wants to kind of weave in to explaining the good news about Jesus and how it actually helped some of the questions the Romans had. See, the Romans were a little confused about how God's gospel, the gospel of Jesus, how did the Jewish law fit into that? And how did the Jewish people fit into that gospel? So that's the big way. And you can find that in verse 15 in chapter 1. This is why Paul, one of his reasons, he says, "So I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome." And what does Paul say about this gospel? Well, let's look at verses 16 and 17, where he says, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek." And this is the verse I really want us to pay attention to. Verse 17, "For in it," that is the gospel, "the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith." And I'm going to end right there. Paul wants Christians to know that in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed because we need to be made right with God. Without being made right before God, God will judge and punish those who are not righteous. For God to be just, he must punish those who are not righteous. So again, Paul lays out how God's righteousness works itself out with certain types of people, and the first type being those who flee from him. So this is our first point. Our first response are those who flee, or you could say the unrighteous, and this is found in Romans 1. Now I want to calm you guys down, because I know we read a lot of verses around here. I am not going to be reading chapters 1 through 3 all the way, verse by verse, okay? What I am going to do is I'm going to highlight some of the key verses where I think Paul is really trying to drive certain important points about what the gospel is, and especially these responses to God's righteousness. So I'm going to give you kind of the hot points, the main ideas, and we're just going to go through a couple of verses. So be at ease. We're not going to read the whole thing. But I hope you can get a feel. I hope maybe even at lunch you can read through chapters 1 through 3 and say, "Oh, okay, I see where Steve's highlighting things. That makes sense," okay? So don't worry. All right. Now back to Romans chapter 1. The first thing Paul wants to remind the Romans, and remind us, and to understand about God's righteousness, is that we all know we need to get right with him. Look at verses 19 and 20. "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world." So when you look out at the world, Paul points out, we know there is a God. Just think about, it just so happens we live on a planet that is just the right distance from the sun and has just the right atmosphere, just the right environment to give us food, air. And it just so happens, I don't even know if this is right, thousands, there are probably millions of planets, what we know of, and this is the only planet that has those conditions. Is that the most amazing coincidence in the world? Or maybe it whispers that there's a God. Just maybe. I think Psalm 19 puts this quite beautifully. Let's listen just to what the psalmist says. "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world." We don't have to even look outside, though that definitely actually screams, not whispers, that there is a God. We can look inside ourselves. We know there's a God just in our own interior life, our heart? Why do we have an understanding of that there's a sense of right and wrong? Why do we have that tug? Or more importantly, why do we have a desire to find meaning or happiness in life? Our own bodies and thoughts whisper, there's a God. God has put eternity into man's hearts, as the preacher says in Ecclesiastes 3. No one can plead ignorance about knowing and seeking out God. We are held accountable. The reality is people don't have a desire to know or obey God. It's because they don't want to. They don't want to. Paul says people are suppressing this truth about God. It's not that they don't know the truth. It's that they're pressing it down as they look outside and look at the sky, or they look within themselves, within their hearts. See, we're either coming toward God or we're fleeing away from him. Now, what about people in remote villages? What about them, isolated from the world? Well, yeah, they know that there's a God, and they're accountable to him. Now, it doesn't mean that they have saving knowledge, that they can get right with God, but they all know that there is a God, and we know that too. Like everyone else, we all know that God has revealed himself. And even people that are way out in some island somewhere have a sense, there's a God. I need to do something about that. There's a God. And the thing that's really crazy is this fleeing from God is not just this aimless fleeing. It's going towards something. Those who are running away from God are running toward something else they can worship. Paul says, look at verse 25 in Romans 1. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. We are all made worshipers. God has made us dependent creatures that need purpose. Something we can give ourselves over to praise. Everyone has a longing to be devoted to something bigger than themselves. I mean, just think about it. Why do people go crazy over sports and politics? There's a lot of reasons, but there is this drive there. But even more interesting, why do people make a sports team or a political party the very essence of their identity? When their sports team loses, they're devastated. When they win, they're elated. And you can translate that into politics as well. Maybe it's because they long to worship. You see, when we turn away from God, we will turn to something in creation and make our own gods. It's just going to happen. And sadly, as we willfully flee from God, sometimes God will give people over to their lusts and false gods. Look at verse 26, chapter 1. God gave them up to dishonorable passions. God will at times let people go from bad to worse. And Paul just gives one example of how bad this is. Those who are fleeing, they exchange God for pleasure. And as God gives them over to this perversion to pleasure, they start seeking things that are even unnatural. Men seeking romantic relationships with other men, and women seeking other women. Verse 28, look at that. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done. Things don't get better when you turn from God and turn to something else. They get worse. They just get worse. And it's important to see that God is patient with sinners most of the time, but not every time. Not every time. It doesn't mean that God will never act just because he's patient. People might think they can live like the world just for a little while. I'll just do it for a little bit, and then I'll come to church, or then I'll get right with God. Maybe. Maybe not. How do you know? We should never presume upon God's patience, ever. Unrighteous acts are always detestable to God. God has called us to live a particular way for our good and for his glory. We should obey him now, not later. Because guess what? later may never come. This is just poor advice in general. You ever heard the advice, just ask for forgiveness rather than permission? Like, just do the thing, whatever you want to do, and whatever comes out, just say, hey, will you forgive me? And then you got to do what you want to do, and there wasn't many consequences. Well, that's foolish advice to begin with, but with God, it can be deadly. Not only for your body, but more importantly, your soul. God will not be mocked. God's kindness is meant to lead us to repentance, not indifference, or at worst, rebellion. As Psalm 95 says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your heart, as in the rebellion. Don't suppress the truth of God. Don't run from him. Worship him. Because actively fleeing from God and willingly doing things that are unrighteous and dishonor God, he must judge and punish. Going back, go to verse 18 in chapter 1. Listen to what Paul says. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and all unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. People know they need to get right with God, but instead of coming to him, they flee from him, doing what he hates. Maybe not a good response. But this leads us to our second response, those who fake, or the self-righteous, which is found in starting in chapter 2, and then it kind of closes up in end of chapter 3, verses 18. Now, I don't know if anybody of you are thinking this way, but some of you might. Yeah, those people, those wicked people, get them, God. They are. There's some disgusting things people do, despicable and wicked. God does need to punish these people. Yeah, maybe. But what about you? What about your life? You see, Paul is ready for this response, this feeling of like, yeah, I know I'm on God's side. Those people over there, they're the bad ones. Listen to what Paul says in chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. Listen to what he says. He says, therefore, you have no excuse, O man, every one of you who judges, for in passing judgment on another, you condemn yourself, because you, the judge, practice the very same things. See, Paul turns his finger away from the fling and points it right at those who think they can actually get right with God in their own power. It's something similar that the prophet Nathan did to David when he committed murder and adultery. Nathan told a story about injustice, and David was really worked up against Nathan. He's like, I'm going to get that guy. And Nathan turns his finger to Nathan turns to David. There we go. I'm going to get it right here. To David and says, you're that man. Well, guess what? Paul's doing the same thing, but he's pointing it at us. Don't think that just because you don't have these outward unrighteous acts, you're meeting God's standard too. Those who think they could keep God's righteous demands are fooling themselves. You might as well be faking it. God wants to expose the thinking that righteousness, a right standing before God, the righteousness that God would accept, can be accomplished in our own power. Our own righteousness won't get us right with God. It won't. We are faking it if we think our actions and life will match up to God's standards so that we can have a relationship, saving relationship with God. Now, it's really important to stand, too, who's Paul's really putting his finger on, because there's a challenge here. And it has to do with, Paul is talking primarily with Jewish people at this point. See, the Jewish people were chosen by God. We've been learning about this from Exodus, remember? God calls his people, delivering them out of slavery, redeeming them, buying them back by amazing signs and wonders. God promised there would be a Messiah, a great king, who would deliver God's people against their oppressors. Why would God judge his people? God gave them the law and the sign of circumcision, which set them apart from all other peoples. The Jewish people would have understood they were not perfect because they made sacrifices, but but they would think, well, everything's okay, the Jews thought, because they had the law and circumcision. They would be made righteous by being set apart by circumcision and knowing the law. But Paul needed to remind the Jewish people, I think we need to be reminded as well, there were advantages, yet that did not make them righteous, because all will be judged by their works. Look at verses 9 through 11, chapter 2. There will be tribulation and distress for every human who does evil, to the Jew first and also to the Greek, but glory and honor and peace for everyone who does good, the Jew first and also to the Greek, for God shows no partiality. Paul reminds us that God does not grade on a curve, even for the Jewish people, even for those who knew the right thing to do. I don't know if any of you have taken a really difficult class. I had a couple hard ones in college, and in fact, the class was so hard, we had a couple tests where everybody bombed. Like everybody got a failing grade. It was just a disaster. And so usually, if the professor is really nice or he wants to be considerate, he grades on a curve. So what he does is he takes a failing grade and he boosts it up to some degree so it becomes close to a passing grade. So you can go from like an F, failing, to like a D or a C, which is really nice of a professor. But it's not the grade you got. You got a little bump there. God doesn't grade on a curve. He doesn't. He does not grade on a curve. The Jews did have the law, which made clear what God's righteous demands were. And clearly knowing what God requires is a great thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But knowing is not the same thing as doing or obeying. It's not. Listen to what Paul says in verses 12 and 13. For all who have sinned without the law will perish without the law. It's true. And all who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified. Or as how we've been talking about it, being declared righteous by God's assessment. Doing, not hearing, is what's decisive with the law, God's standard, for the Jews or for anyone else. But the Jewish people were set apart by God as his people. He even gave them the sign of circumcision. Doesn't that help them when it comes to God's righteous standard? Are not the Jewish people the privileged people of God in God's eyes? Yes. Yes, in some way. But that's why Paul keeps saying, in a lot of places here, that it is believing the gospel and being judged by God is to the Jew first and then to the Greek. But the Jewish people didn't realize an important point. Privileges or advantages don't shield them from meeting God's standard. You can give somebody a lead in a race, like starting the race with a lead. You can give somebody, if you're playing a game to make it a little more even, give them like a point advantage. You can do that. That's an advantage. But it doesn't guarantee that you're going to win. It's just an advantage. It's just a privilege. You don't presume upon a privilege. You appreciate the opportunity that you got a privilege overall. See, being set apart by God, even with the rite of circumcision, only matters if you keep God's righteous commands. Listen to how Paul says it in verse 25. For circumcision is indeed of value if you obey the law. But if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. I want to talk to us just for a little bit here because I think it's really important. You being here does not get you right with God. Sitting here in the pew listening to me preparing this and talking to you right now does not make me right with God. Me reading my Bible does not make me right with God, doesn't make you right with God. You doing nice things for other people does not make you right with God. It doesn't. Not in your own strength it doesn't. You doing all those nice things will never negate the rebellion that you have within your heart. It won't. It won't. And you might ask yourself, then why am I up here? Why are you here? We'll get to that. But it's really important to know, doing this right now earns you nothing. Not in God's eyes. It doesn't make you righteous before him. And this is what Paul says. This is his big point he's been coming to help us really understand. This is in chapter 3. Chapter 3, verses 9 and 10. What then? Are the Jews better off? No, not at all. For we already charged that both Jews and Greeks are under sin, as it is written, none is righteous, no, not one. No one understands, no one seeks for God. You see, at the end of the day, with God's righteous standards, whether you're fleeing from God or you're faking that you think you meet God's righteous standard, all are under sin, and that is the issue. That's the problem. That's the big problem. The reason why some of us want to flee from God is because we have rebellion within our hearts. And what's even scarier is the reason why we can't even keep the law, even if we know it, is because we have this rebellion deep within our hearts. What the Bible, what God calls sin. And sin has power over us. There is no way we have the power to be righteous in God's sight. Looking within ourselves will only bring about despairs. Paul ends this thought like in chapter 3, verse 20, for by the works of the law, no human being will be justified or be made right in his sight, since through the law comes the knowledge of sin. Pretty bleak, right? Kind of scary. Well, I got good news for you. There's hope. And this leads us to our last response. Those who have faith or have an alien righteousness, all that means is a righteousness outside of ourselves. And that's found in chapter 3, verses 21 through 26. This is where Paul has been leading all this point. This is the best part of the gospel that Paul wanted to impart to the Roman and to us reading this. Listen to what he says in verse 22 through 24. He says, the righteousness of God is through faith in Jesus Christ. For all who believe, there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God and are being justified, or we can say declared righteous, by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. Paul wants the Romans and us to know a right standing before God can happen, but it's only through trusting and having faith in Jesus. Why? Well, because Jesus is righteous. Jesus is righteous. He obeyed all that God required. Jesus perfectly trusted God outwardly in his actions and inwardly in his motivations. And Jesus didn't just do this because he wanted to gloat, saying, hey, this is how you do it, guys. Look at me. No. He did something much better. Though he would have every right to just do that, show us up. He didn't. In love, he lived a perfect life, a perfectly just life, being righteous, so that he could be punished for those who would trust in him. Jesus living out a righteous life by God's standards, Jesus could freely give up his life and be punished in the place of those who have faith. Through Jesus' sacrifice, dying upon a cross like a sinner, God's righteous judgment could be poured out upon Jesus and actually deal with sin. As Paul says in verse 25, chapter 3, God put forward Jesus as a propitiation, or pacifying God's wrath by Jesus' blood. Jesus suffered, shedding his blood, allowed God's righteous anger against his people's sin to be relieved or let go. So that when someone trusts or has faith in Jesus about what he has done for sinners, they are now justified or made righteous by God's power as a gift. And it is a gift. Remember, all will be judged by works. That doesn't change. That never changes. But by putting our trust and following Jesus, his righteous life will be given to us as a gift through faith. God will judge us based upon Jesus' righteous work. We are made righteous by faith in Jesus. This is what Paul says in verse 26. It, which is God's patience in waiting to send Jesus, was to show his righteousness at the present time so that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. Or we can say it this way. Everyone here today, there is only one way for God to be just and for us to be just. And that is through trusting in the person and work of Jesus. That's the only way. It's the only way. This is wonderfully true. And so I beg you, that you people here would not run away from Jesus, turning to something in creation as your God. But also I hope that you wouldn't try to think you could earn being right by how you act. I hope that we put our trust in Jesus to be righteous before God. All right. So those who have put their trust in Jesus, what does this look like? What does this mean on a day-to-day basis? It's great. Okay, so I'm supposed to trust in Jesus, and that's what matters. How is this supposed to help me tomorrow? Well, I want to say, even us who trust in Jesus, we're always having to fight against fleeing from God and faking before God and before others. That never goes away. See, there's always this little lie, I think, that we can start believing, that we might lean on our own abilities, or the things that we do that are empowered by the Spirit, and we think we did them. We did it. We're special. We're so amazing. But it's always important to remember that our right standing before God is only by faith. Remember, look at verse 27 in chapter 3. Paul goes after this. He says, then what becomes of our boasting? It's excluded. You can't boast. There's nothing to be boasting about because you didn't do anything. It's a gift. There's never a reason for us to feel superior to another Christian. Never. Never. Now, although God in his goodness has given us different gifts and abilities to varying degrees, we're all the same in terms of faith. We have one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all, as Paul says in Ephesians 4. And since it's Reformation Day, I think it's really important for us to remember something that Martin Luther said. He said, we are all mere beggars, showing other beggars where to find bread. And the bread Luther is talking about is the bread of life. It's Jesus, the King, Jesus Christ. We are beggars. We all need Jesus to rescue us from our sins. And as sinners, we're all the same. So here we really go here. So I want to challenge us here at Emmaus. What this looks like. We need to fight really hard that we build each other up in love and not try to block each other off with information. Now, don't get me wrong. I want to say this really clearly. I love reading. I love learning. I love learning about big words like Christology and righteousness and sanctification. And you can learn those things, and it's beautiful and wonderful. And some of us even love having the label being reformed, hearkening back to the Reformation. There's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. But as a gentle warning, that doesn't save you. That doesn't make you more holy to God just because you know these things. And it definitely doesn't make you more superior to another Christian at all. We want to grow in our understanding of God's Word. But some of us are going to give ourselves over to more reading, understanding because of our gifts. But who gave us those gifts in the first place? God did. It's not something special within you. He did it for you. And it wasn't for your sake to make yourself look so special. It's so you can glorify God and help his people. We must never think that the tribe we identify with, the information that we have, and the theological work we know about makes us superior, that kind of distance ourselves from other people. You see, the goal isn't more information. That's a part of it, but that's not the goal. The demons know that Jesus is Lord. The Pharisees knew more of the Bible than probably all of us, memorized more of it, but it didn't do anything for them. Why? because they weren't really living it out. They didn't know what they were there for. They were dependent upon God, not on the information they knew. As Paul said to the Corinthians, if you want to see how this worked itself out in a really bad way, look at 1 Corinthians and what the Christians did there. And Paul said this. He said, knowledge can puff up, but love builds up. Love is what we want to do. We want to help each other, build each other up with love. And that's going to have some information to it. I'm not going to lie. It's going to have some information. But we should never put the cart before the horse. We love God, and so we want to know more about him. We love God's people, so we help people understand it better. But it's not because we want to look impressive. We just want to love our God. Never forget where all our gifts come from. And remember that we are righteous through faith in Jesus. We are all mere beggars, showing other beggars where to find bread. And the bread of life is what we truly need. God is righteous, and so he requires a righteous life. You can't escape God, so fleeing won't work. Trying to live by God's standards won't work because of the controlling power of sin. There's only one who lived a righteous life, and that was Jesus. Jesus sacrificed his life so that those who have faith in him and his work will be declared righteous. So let's look back where we started. Can you go to chapter 1, verses 16 and 17? Why was Paul so eager to preach the gospel? Why should we be so eager to preach the gospel? Let's listen again. It is the power of God for salvation to everyone, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. May we today live by faith in Jesus, the only way we can be righteous before God. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, again, we thank you, Lord, that you do speak to us. And not only that, you have given us a great gift as you given us your son, Jesus. And we are thankful that by faith, by trusting in him, you see us through your son, our King. Lord, help us think deeply about how this lives and breathes in our lives, to know that each and every day that we can learn more about you, that we can be useful in any sort of way is a gift from you, because it doesn't earn us anything. So we will respond in gratefulness. Everything we do is just thanking you for what you've already done for us. It's a response that you have brought us into your family, not because we are so special, but because you are such a great God. Help us to know that it is beautiful that you are righteous. And amazing thing, you have made us righteous by faith in your son, Jesus. Help us to live that out in all our lives today. And we ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.